Hello folks, I'm Heather and this is Recently Seen Reading, and today I have a quick wrap up of what I read in August, now that we're starting September. It was an uneven reading month for me again. It's been a year of uneven reading, I think, but August was uneven for me for changes in my physical environment that I couldn't and can't do much about. No, it's not the sprained ankle, which is still a difficulty. It's just a change in the built environment. So about 4 or 5 years ago, one of the landlords in the city cleared out 5, 6, 7 older wooden buildings, 3-story buildings that had originally been family homes but had been converted into warrens of small apartments that were typically rented out to students. So the landlord cleared those out of students pre-pandemic, so 4 years ago, 5 years ago now. And about a year and a half ago, a backhoe went through and tore them all down. And there was an empty lot for about a year and a half. But the first week of August, construction prep started. And construction prep right now means backhoes, dozers, trucks, porta potties, construction trailers, and drilling. Lots and lots of drilling to put the footings of the preliminary footings of the 8 or 9 story building that's going to go in there and that means drilling through bedrock, and bedrock here is 2 or 3 feet down. It's a city built on rock. You can farm rock here, so it's been a challenge to figure out how to manage that, because it's noisy here from 7 o'clock in the morning to about 5 o'clock in the evening. So that's in addition to the usual racket of sirens and buses and trucks and people coming and going, because it's a major thoroughfare. So I've figured out that earplugs are going to be necessary for part of the day, some days of the week. I've got a better sense of the pattern of the guys when they show up and when they drill and what the various drilling sounds sound like. It's kind of amusing to have a bird's eye view into what is going to be a 2-year construction project. The big downside, beyond the headache that the noises can cause, is that it erodes any kind of time I might be able to film during the day. I used to normally film about 10 o'clock in the morning because the light was good and it was generally quiet. That is no more. So if I'm going to get myself restarted in filming, I'm going to have to learn how to batch film on weekends. So this is me starting to learn how to batch film on weekends. You'll have to bear with me because it's going to be a bit of a bumpy relearning curve. So that's a long preamble to say, uneven reading months. But I did read some things, and some of the stuff I read was interesting, if not always particularly pleasurable, given the headspace I was in. I was participating in the Women's World Cup read-along. I finished almost everything I need to finish for that. I've got one country left to finish, England, and I've got a book that's halfway in progress that I'll finish up for that. But 2 of the books I read for that had been on a long-term reading list for me, and one was, let's see, I want to get the title correct because I usually butcher the titles, would be Clarice Lispector's Passion According to G.H. So this was my choice to cover off Brazil. And it's the story of a woman who is essentially clearing out the room that her maid has used, and discovers a cockroach and that she kills, and then it becomes a long it's not actually long, an extended meditation on the meaning of language and life and art, all turned around with her fear of the cockroach, this kind of aversion she has to the cockroach. So I don't think I was a particularly skilled reader of this one. I'm glad that I've read it. It was my second Lispector. I'll probably go back and try another one in the future, but I think I was underprepared for this one. I think I probably needed to have more recently read some Kafka, for example, or come at it with a more thoughtful approach, but I'm glad to have gotten it done. The other one, much simpler text, I think, and a much quicker read because of that, was Françoise Sagan's Bonjour, Tristesse, which came out in '54, and it's the story of a young woman, I think she's 17, and her interactions with her father and her father's two girlfriends and the narrator's relationship with a young man, all kind of set in the Mediterranean coast over the passage of one summer. And it's an odd book, or I found it odd, and I found the narrator's interest in her father's sex life very strange and unsettling. So it's partly a coming-of-age story, but it's got this kind of creepy undertone. For me, it's a creepy undertone. And I think this might be just a sign that the novel hasn't aged particularly well, for me at least. It reminded me in a strange way of another novel published by a very young woman. So Sagan was, 17, 18 when she published Bonjour, Tristesse? It reminded me in its tone, but not its topic, of Marie Claire Blais' 1959, La Belle Bête, or Mad Shadows in English, which Blais published when she was 19 or 20, and it's got a similar kind of overheated vocabulary or sense of emotions that don't quite fit in culturally approved patterns. So that was an interesting kind of overlap for me. But they, in terms of topic, they have nothing in common at all beyond that they tend to deal with adolescence and adolescent psychology, I think. What else did I read? Oh, I had one of those moments where reading two books back to back reveals the weaknesses of one and the strengths of another. So these are two works of nonfiction. Let me get the titles exactly right. I finished Janet Malcolm's last book, which was published posthumously. Simple title, Still Pictures, which came out earlier this year. You know, she died in 2021. And she had a long career in journalism, worked for The New Yorker, and was tied up in a variety of legal and libel battles over the way she represented various figures associated with the Freud archive, and small controversies around the way she kept notes and the way she represented journalism, which makes her an interesting and compelling cultural figure. And her writing is usually very plain but pointed, so she'd kind of be close to Joan Didion in the plainness and the pointiness of the language. So Last Pictures is Malcolm's account, roughly, of her childhood. She was an immigrant from Czechoslovakia in 1939. She came with her parents fleeing ahead of the Nazi occupation, and the family settled in New Jersey and in New York. And it's organized around family photographs. So a photograph will be presented in the text and then described a little bit, and then Malcolm will respond to what is and in many cases is not shown in the photographs. So this is a fairly kind of common way of approaching how to deal with photographs in texts. And there's nothing particularly wrong with Malcolm's book, but there's nothing particularly satisfying or exciting or interesting in it when you compare it to other works. I think if you're a devotee of Malcolm's writing, or if you've got an interest in immigration issues, especially immigration as it's associated with the Jews fleeing from Europe in the 30s and 40s, it might be more interesting to you than it ultimately was for me. It just felt a little flat. As if Malcolm was really still on the surface level of the photographs and of articulating what her life meant to her and what her parents' lives meant to her. So odd in its flatness for me. And that flatness became far more obvious when I read Christina Sharpe, who's an academic working in Canada now. She's originally from northern New York, I believe, but she works now at York. Her book that just came out, called Ordinary Notes, which is maybe 3 times the length of Malcolm's book, and it's a combination of academic work, academic thinking through of issues, and memoir. So there are short passages, some passages take up maybe half a page, others page and a half, and it comes with a full apparatus of detailed endnotes, and I think there's also a bibliography in it. It's gone back to the library, I don't have it right now. And Sharpe is working through what it means to memorialize the consequences of the transatlantic slave trade, and what it means to build museums around or to acknowledge the history of lynching in the United States. And it's, I think, emotionally a far richer book than Malcolm's. Part of that is because Sharpe is working through what her mother's death meant to her and the grief she feels, both at the loss of her mother, but also the grief she feels at the death of so many young black men as a result of police violence, essentially. So that kind of emotional immediacy gives the book, I think, a much richer feel to it than Malcolm's, which felt kind of thin and distant in comparison. And part of what Sharpe, I think, is interested in is what emotional distance means, what it means to expect to have an intense emotional reaction or to support somebody else's emotional reaction at a site of national memory, in various kinds of memory institutions. It's kind of a bristly book. There'll be lots of phrases and bits and pieces that will irritate some people, but I think it's an intellectually rich book and one that would repay rereading in a way that Malcolm's, I don't think for most people, will repay rereading. And I think for August, Sharpe's book was probably the most interesting book I finished. I don't think there's anything else that I read that was particularly of note. It was such a very uneven reading month for me. I hope your reading month in August was much, much better than mine, and that you're not having to work around the sound of construction, which is basically the norm in cities, and that you have a good reading week. Bye-bye.